What patients seek is not scientific knowledge that doctors hide, but existential authenticity each person must find on her own. Getting too deeply into statistics is like trying to quench a thirst with salty water. The angst of facing mortality has no remedy in probability. So writes Paul Kalanithi of blessed memory in his searing memoir, When Breath Becomes Air. Can we not say the same thing about theology and theodicy, our theories about God and the nature of suffering? What we seek when we suffer is not some theory of God hidden away by theologians that, when once properly understood, will explain and soothe our pain. The angst of facing mortality has no remedy in abstract theories. A cancer diagnosis in oneself or in someone you love requires honest testimony. So this high holidays, I can only share my own journey from 1 year ago. A moment speaking on the high holidays that honestly is just a fog, a vague memory, because while I stood on this bema and tried to teach, my heart was with Jennifer at home. I can't speak for my wife, ever. But particularly about what it's been like to have breast cancer. I can only testify about the particular pain of watching and worrying for your life's partner. I can only reflect on what insights I've managed to glean. I can only share how successfully and not I related to God in the year that has passed. I begin with a confession, a part of my experience about which I don't feel proud and which I share more as a mistake to learn from than an example to follow. During the year, I experienced self-doubt about my suffering. I felt like a half-sufferer. I couldn't silence a voice in my head that minimized the amount of sympathy that I would allow myself to feel. The voice came not from Jennifer, not from you, nor from anyone around me, except myself. And it said things like, "You're not the one who has the cancer. Jennifer does. She's truly suffering. I'm not confronting my mortality. She is." That voice also told me that I wasn't having a true cancer experience. The voice said to me, breast cancer, after all, is quite survivable these days, until it isn't. Trying to be of comfort, the voice of an actual person actually said to Jennifer and me that she'd heard that doctors have become so adept at handling breast cancer, it's as routine as the flu or a cold. Suffice it to say, it didn't feel that way. I was scared. I was exhausted. I felt stretched thin by adrenaline and doctor's appointments. I won't forget talking to the kids, trying to tell them that it would all be okay and wondering if I was lying. Jen had dark moments, I had mine, but that awful accusatory inner voice compared my suffering to people who have it worse. It made me feel like an imposter. Like maybe in my feeling all the exhaustion and sadness and fear, I was just being overly dramatic. In a book, Intoxicated by My Illness, written during the months before he died, the literary critic Anatole Broyard begins, so much of a writer's life consists of assumed suffering, rhetorical suffering, that I felt something like relief, even elation, when the doctor told me I had cancer of the prostate. Suddenly there was in the air a rich sense of crisis, real crisis. Broyard felt a sense of real crisis, but I did not allow myself any relief or elation. The voice denied that my crisis was real, and when I wanted to cry out, accused me of being overly dramatic and told me that my suffering was more assumed and rhetorical than real. Yes, things were suffering, but I always had an explanation for why I was a half-sufferer. And so along with my pain, I felt a sense of guilt, as if by taking energy or time for myself to fall apart or rebuild, I was taking something away from Jennifer or others whose illnesses pushed them statistically closer to death than breast cancer. Our tradition has a name for the voice: Satan. Satan. In Hebrew, sin tet nun sofit. Not the character from the church lady in Saturday Night Live, not a little red figure with a pitchfork on your shoulder. In the Bible, Satan starts out meaning adversary, but by the book of Job, in rabbinic parlance, Satan means an accuser. A prosecutorial angel who argues against you before God, pointing out your worst qualities and weaknesses. Satan is not someone that modern rabbis speak about very much. I imagine I may be the only rabbi in America giving a sermon that includes Satan this Rosh Hashanah, but he lurks around Jewish sources. The Jewish tradition is to blow shofar every day of Elul, the month leading up to the high holidays, as a way of stirring our hearts to repentance. We blow the shofar every day of Elul except yesterday, the day before Rosh Hashanah. And why not? According to rabbinic sources, to confuse Satan, to throw him off, make him think that he may be counted wrong, that somehow he missed Rosh Hashanah. So what lesson did I learn from that voice? Don't believe it. Don't diminish your suffering. Don't compare it with others. There's no contest. Each of our suffering is unique because each of us is unique and special to God. I want to tell you, there are some things that I believe that I cannot prove to you. And one that I will stake my life on is that God cares about each and every life, each person, each soul. Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote, "God is not detached from or indifferent to our joys and griefs. Authentic, vital needs of our body and soul are a divine concern. In my best moments, I was able to silence that voice and accept that my journey was no more and no less deserving of God's compassion. I wore a special tallis today, the tallis I was ordained in. And at my ordination, my teacher, Rabbi, sang to me, Chaste Hashem, ki lo tamu, ki lo chalu rachamav. God's loving kindnesses are never exhausted. God's compassion never ends. And in good moments, I was able to allow myself to believe that I too was deserving of God's love, that God cared not just for everybody else, but for me too. Another memory from this past year, shopping, specifically Harris Teeter. If illness feels like a great drama of highs and lows, then shopping reminds you that life continues in all its banality. Most days and in most places, most people were nice, but once someone in the supermarket was a real jerk. And when they were, I thought to myself, if that person only knew that I just came from my wife's chemotherapy at the Duke Cancer Center, they'd be ashamed of themselves. Walking the aisles looking for mustard or waiting in line to check out, I felt like I was a spy carrying out some important secret mission that if people only knew, they wouldn't be so careless with my feelings. I felt a sense of entitlement or self-importance, like people should move the heck out of the way for the guy whose wife has cancer. But after a while, I started to wonder, really to realize, and to ask myself, how many other people were carrying a secret suffering with them behind their eyes in the supermarket aisle? How many people did I pass looking for 1% milk who were struggling with depression or grieving for a loved one who died too soon? How many people shopping for bread were an exhausted and lonely caretaker or had a child struggling with alcoholism? How many times had I been careless and callous with the feelings of a stranger wrapped up in my own narcissism? Don't wrong the stranger in your midst, the Torah tells us. And the verse probably does come to teach us about the careful treatment of new immigrants, but what about all of the strangers in our midst? To remind us again that a good life is measured in how much kindness we give to the world. I think back also on my experience of prayer this year. Did I pray more often or more intently? Surely I included Jennifer in my prayers with an added urgency. And the gratitude I feel for the hundreds, if not thousands, of people around the world who included Jennifer in their prayers is beyond what I can express. But what did I pray for? A small part of my prayers was, for lack of a better term, to cover our bases. If indeed God does control each cell of the universe and could intervene somehow to heal Jennifer, then there was no harm in saying her Hebrew name one more time or with just a little extra oomph. But that vision of God, a vision that only if you take it literally, but it's there in the Unatana Tokef prayer that we will say in a few minutes. When it's taken literally, that if I pray harder or give more to tzedakah or do tshuva, then God is somehow miraculously going to spare my life. That vision has driven more people away from God than brought them close. So I covered my bases. I gave in to my own superstitious side by praying a little harder. But that vision of God was also one that I needed to let go of. I've lost a lot of people close to me. My grandparents, friends, Jay, Joel, Alicia, Karen, my friend David Knauert, whose death in some ways brought me to Durham and Bethel. Believing that God killed them for something they or I did or didn't do, or that their deaths were justified according to some logic that I will understand one day. Such a vision of God nearly drove me away from God years ago. This past year, I took comfort in a different part of the Jewish tradition where the rabbis say, Olam keminhago noheg. The world goes according to its way. Cancer happens, accidents happen. We need not hold God responsible for every one of these things. Metaphors about God are all insufficient. In the Kaddish that we say today and this week, we emphasize that God is le'ela u'le'ela, above and beyond any words that we can use to describe God. But words are what we have. But don't get caught up in the words. There is one image of God I've been relating to that has been helpful this year. Not really a traditional image. It comes from, admittedly, a strange place for theology. It comes from a book on Jewish parenting by Dr. Wendy Mogul called The Blessings of a B-. She argues that too many parents make a mistake by trying to solve our teenagers' problems for them, practicing helicopter parenting, as it is known, swooping in and saving our children from themselves before they fail, is an abdication of our responsibility as parents. Mogul argues that instead of micromanaging our children so that they achieve momentary success, she proposes a different and beautiful image of good parenting. A mother or a father who is around, available to answer questions and give the best advice that we can. Someone perhaps sitting in the living room, not directly involved in every moment, but available so that when our children need to cry, we are there to dry their tears and sit beside them until they are ready to get up and move on again. That is how God has felt to me this year. Available, helpful, but not someone who I have looked to solve every problem or make the hurt magically go away. It's true, when we're young, parents sometimes do punish us if we misbehave. We do get grounded if we skip school. And the truth is, I do find some richness, not everybody does, but in asking myself whether some things that happen to me that I don't want maybe are from God, and maybe there are things that I'm supposed to learn from and to grow from. But just as not every bad thing that happens to us as children is caused by our parents. Not every bad thing that happens in this world need be thought of as a punishment from God. If we get cancer, it need not be a punishment from God any more than falling down on the playground is a punishment from our parents. Sometimes painful things happen. A good parent knows, is paying attention, is available, can dry our eyes, can help us to find strength and continue when we don't think we can go on anymore. And maybe we can get insight from them, not about why bad things happen, but about how we can grow. I do believe that God is paying attention, that through our amazing community, that God gave us strength that we wouldn't have had. And I have learned, I hope, from this experience. Sometimes I imagine myself like a teenager sitting in my room alone and in pain, and then finally coming downstairs, sitting on the couch and leaning on God, not so much as Avinu Shabashamayim, which means our Father who is in heaven, but perhaps Imenu Shaba'olam, our mother, our nurturer, who is here in this world. Maybe coming downstairs, laying my head on God's lap and just checking in. I might say, hi. And God might say, hello, dear one. And God might ask me, so how are you? What do you want to talk about? I want to conclude this sermon by trying actually to answer what I might say if God were to ask me, so what do you want to talk about? So, God, I'm actually doing okay. Last year was very hard. Not an easy year. I'm grateful that Jen is feeling better, and thank you for whatever role you played in that. It's still hard, though. I love the people in this room. And I know that there are people sitting here this year who are scared like I was a year ago, not knowing what the future holds for them or for someone they love. I wish it didn't have to be that way. I hope those people find you, not because you're going to cure everyone, but it helps a lot to know you're here, that we're never alone. Thanks for Bethel. It's a good place. Not perfect, but in our best moments, and we have a lot of those. We bring food, and we care for each other, and we dry each other's tears. I know, we argue sometimes. That's what families do. But we do it out of love, because we care. I hope we're making you proud. I feel different than I did a few years ago. I can really say now how grateful I am that you brought me into the world. It's a crazy life you've given us. I don't know if you knew, I guess you did because you're God, but I never told you about this before, that sometimes up in my room all by myself, I couldn't say that. I couldn't feel how lucky I am to be in the world. Because it hurts. Life hurts so much sometimes. And sometimes all the love I felt from my friends who died just turned to pain. And I thought loss was all there is. And I forgot about love, and sometimes it hurt so much that I didn't want to go on. And there was darkness all around, like rushing waters. King David, you liked him a lot. He wrote a poem about this that I liked, and there were some campers who recorded a beautiful melody to it that I like listening to. There's a line, "The rivers rise up, Adonai." The rivers raise up their roar, the rivers raise up their waves. But above the roar of the vast sea and the majestic breakers of the ocean, you, Lord, you stand. There you were above the roar of the sea, beyond the breakers. And because you were there, I'm still here. And even though this year's been a hard one, I'm grateful to be here again. And I wouldn't trade my life for another. Even though I don't know what next year is going to bring. I'm going to get going now. Musaf and everything. Thanks for the chat. Pretty neat journey, this thing they call life. I'll do my best to make you proud. I know. I'll try to stay in better touch. Love you too. Shana Tova.